Hello, my name is Dzindzichashvili, and we continuing the series on English opening. C4, C5, knight F3, knight F6, and after G3, on the previous chapter, we covered whole E6 variations. Well, I didn't go into details after D4, CD, knight D4. We completely covered D5 move, but I didn't cover in details bishop B4 check, where we go bishop D2, and after queen B6, we can go knight B3, or we can simply play here bishop G2. They are all very playable moves. And now queen takes d4, bishop takes b4. White has good compensation for a pawn which black may win after queen takes c4 or queen takes b2. Now this is going to be rather long. It's going to take us long time. But if you go through databases or the books, you're going to have complete coverage of it. What I want to do instead, I want to continue with the variations that make a lot of sense and where I have to offer something of my own, which is not in this position, not the e6 move. But we continue with moves like g6 or knight c6. Those are by far the most common moves, as well as d5. But with the g6 and knight c6, you will frequently see emerging these two moves. Now, d5. After c takes d, knight takes d5, knight c3, knight c6. I want to do two things here. First of all, I want to tell you why after bishop g2 and knight c7, that move that was played very frequently and was very popular, why I wouldn't recommend this to play for black. And secondly, we will analyze the consequences of relatively better move. Well, actually, I should say better move, g6. The idea of knight c7 move is to play e5 for black, which is not possible immediately because white plays knight takes e5, getting big advantage. You see, attacking the knight on d5, and after knight takes c3, white can play either knight takes c6 or bishop takes c6. In both cases, they will have big advantage. This is not playable, so if black wants to play e5, type of a kind of Maroczy type setup, then they have to go knight c7. I have played many games with this position, and d3 is the best move by far. White is not in a hurry to castle. If white castles, that will transpose us to Maroczy Bind position where white does not take advantage of early knight c7 move, which is as well playable. However, d3 may create some problems for black. e5, white goes knight d2. Now, bishop takes c6 is a real threat. For example, if bishop e7 is played for black, white is going to go bishop takes c6, bc. And I have very good memories with this position. This position is very much better for white. So I played and won this game against some very strong players. What you do here for white is you go knight c4, and when they protect, you go b3 and bishop b2, maybe even bishop e3, and then what you do with your king, well, after b3, for example, castle and bishop b2, what you do is simply play f3, and black is going to have very hard time taking advantage of white's weaknesses on king's side. Well, this is a long subject, and we are not going to go into details of this position. But as a rule, black does not allow to double pawns on c file. So instead of bishop e7, bishop d7 should be played. So after bishop d7, white plays castle, black plays bishop e7, and now they are ready to castle. So we go knight c4, and now if black castles, white can win this pawn, and black will not have sufficient compensation. Suppose they want to preserve the light square bishop to come back on c6 and have control on diagonal. But if white simply goes f3 and then goes knight c4, it's hard to justify sacrifice of a central pawn. That's why they normally play f6 instead of castling. But after f6, we go f4. You see the difference between this position and Maroczy Bind positions. We start immediate activities in the center. However, there is also this variation with extra tempo in accelerated Draken, where white is on the opposite, has same position black has, but with extra tempo. Even with the tempo down, black is okay here. But in this position, if black plays b5, white goes knight e3 and ef. I want to tell you about this position that theory recommends rook takes f4, and after the castling, knight f5. But what I found out, when I played this position, I played this position differently. I played knight f5 here instead of taking on f4. And now if black takes on f5, there is bishop takes c6. And what black should do, probably just castle. It's a possibility of this castling. And white can simply take on e7, and they will have much better position after bishop takes f4. And same, by the way, happens if black goes b4. Now taking on g7 is not good for white. We have two knights hanging. But if white simply plays knight takes e7, queen takes e7, and bishop takes f4, they have much better position. For example, b takes c, bishop takes c7, and after c takes b, rook b1, well, actually, rook c8 is most accurate move. This was played before. White is having an advantage here. They're going to get back the b2 pawn. They have better pawn structure. They have two bishops. They have an advantage. So the conclusion we came to that knight c7 is not a good idea for black to play in this position. So what they should do, they should go g6. Then white castles, bishop g7, and we got position where white can play for activity, like something like knight g5, but that doesn't do anything for white, because knight g5 simply e6. White doesn't get an advantage here. Knight e4, b6. And on d3, black simply castle. There is nothing that white can do really to harm black's position. Black is doing okay. The other options are, I have played this position many times for both sides. The other options are knight takes d5, as well as d3 here, on bishop g7, d3. So knight takes d5, queen takes d5, now d3, and after castling, a3. This position is absolutely equal. Well, the only problem, a3, or even if white plays bishop e3, this position is equal. Now, the only thing you should know here is what to do in this position. For example, in this position, best move is bishop d7, allowing knight d4, and after queen d6. It's been proven that white has no advantage here whatsoever. And on rook c1, you have to make one accurate move, which is queen e6. And after queen e6, if black plays b6, they're doing fine. They're doing fine. And if bishop takes c5, then bishop takes b2. And on rook b1, black plays bishop f6. And now after rook b7, black can play queen takes a2. And after bishop takes e7, they're going to be pawned down and having good pass pawn on a file, which is likely to be a draw, but a lot safer is the other continuation that will get us totally equal position. So what we do here, instead of taking on a2, we go queen c6, attacking bishop and the rook. Forced bishop takes e7, queen takes b7, bishop takes f6, and white has sufficient compensation for exchange. They have two central pawns, but they are not better. Don't get the wrong idea that you can checkmate black on dark squares, because black plays here queen a6, attacking the bishop. And whatever white is trying to do, and the best move is, by far best move is queen a1, and now rook f2 e8. Black's rook getting open files very, very quickly. Now, bishop h8 doesn't do anything, and it's not a good move. It's not a good move, because you go f6, and when white takes on f6, open files are more important, especially with exchange up, than this diagonal. Another bishop h8 can simply be met with rook e7 or queen b7. Black is better. White cannot do that, but if white doesn't play bishop h8, go rook a1, then it's simply equal position. Rook e6, now bishop h8 simply loses after f6, and white has to retreat bishop on c3, and I would evaluate this position approximately equal. Okay, here is my conclusion about those positions. Now, going back to where we get this type of position, there is a couple of things we should know. Playing this position for black, your focus has to be on equality. What you're playing for, equality. Now, what I would recommend for black to play is not this, but the other way. And here is what. I'm going to give you the very valuable suggestion. In this position, continua symmetrical. g6 and knight c6. But move order is very important. You gotta go knight c6 first. After bishop g2, do not play g6 yet. Play d6. It's a big difference in the move order. Because if you go g6 after d4, cd, knight takes d4, you get the position that is very well known, and you're already in this position, and you have to play with the latest words in a theory. But before I move to the move order that I want to suggest, let's look at this position. I want to show you the way it was played in one game after knight c3. Suppose knight c3, bishop g7, castle d5. We already talked about this position. We just had it on the board. Suppose white tries to play very slowly for some positional advantage after a3, queen d6, and rook b1. This already happened in my game. In this position, white has nothing. Black has maybe better position here. And I will show you the unusual move here. But the reason why I still don't recommend to play this very much because of bishop e3 move and some other options for white. So the economy way to play to give your opponent less opportunities. But in the game that I was referring to after a3, queen d6, rook b1, I played c4. This is the pawn sacrifice that gives black great position, if white accepts the pawn. If white doesn't accept the pawn, they have to go bishop f4, e5, bishop d2, and on cd, knight e1. They can play it this way, but we can't even talk about white's advantage here. Now, what happens if white simply accepts the pawn sack? It's amazing to see how quickly this position transforms in a very bad position for white. Queen takes, rook takes. Bishop f5. Rook a1. Now, knight a5, attacking c4 pawn. Knight d2. Now, rook d8, threatening knight takes c4, or knight b3, rook e1, and now rook c8. You see total domination of black's pieces, and it's very hard to move here for white. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of giving you the bunch of various different ideas. Now I'm going to give you a good and interesting move order that will give you very safe position. But on the other hand, if you are a player that is not looking for safe position, but looking for very interesting fighting positions, those will be the very interesting suggestions. Here now, my suggestion after bishop g2, instead of g6, to play d6. Why would we do this move? If knight c3, you continue g6. So before white goes d4, you have to have your pawn on d6. Then you take, white takes, and you go bishop d7. You see, you are not going to have a problem with a c6 knight, which you already support with a bishop, and you don't have to take white's knight on d4. And this position I find as absolutely equal. White has no advantage. This is an easy way to play double fianchetto, not double fianchetto, when both sides fianchetto in c4, c5 English. So after c4, c5, knight f3, knight f6, g3. If you know white wants to play bishop g2, knight c3, and d4, that's what most likely they would want to play. Start with knight c6, and on bishop g2, d6. You see, you already have a setup for d4 move. cd, knight d4, knight bishop d7. You should be able to do that. If white does not play d4, they castle. No, actually, black's move, they go d6. If they castle, you go g6. You don't have to play bishop d7. And if they go d4, you immediately take, and bishop d7. Same thing happens if instead of d4, they go knight c3. You continue with bishop g7. On d4, anytime you are prepared to play bishop d7, and you have perfectly safe and equal position. So this represents no danger, and it's no problem for white. Now, on the other hand, now you can ask me, it's like a chicken and an egg. If this is so good for black, what do we do for white? Then I show you something for white. So if this is so good for white, what do we do for black? Well, when you go c4, c5, knight f3, knight f6, there are various different positions you can go to. For example, knight c3, and after g6, here you're already entering some Maroczy Bind position with e4. And there is also d5 move, which is also very playable after cd, knight takes d5, and bishop d2. But those are less English type of positions. And I already mentioned in previous chapters that English is a huge, absolutely huge subject. We cannot cover close to everything. So when you have some individual questions, try to get some answers from the books, from databases, or maybe even request, maybe we can do additional video on that chapter. And again, once I am done completely with this English opening, I could, by request, there may be done another 20, but we cannot do them all. We cannot absolutely fill up all the videos on chess.com with English. So we do it by the level of interest in certain variation. But this is for now the suggestions, a whole bunch of suggestions for white and for black. We're going to be covering a lot more, but this is all for now with the covering of C4, C5 chapter. For now, we're going to be covering a lot more in the upcoming series. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.